Jim Cornette is one of the most polarizing personalities in professional wrestling. People either like or dislike his opinions on professional wrestling, what it is now. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about today in this video, obviously, a new book, a new project that he has brought out, or is bringing out really, in association with IDW Publishing. It is, of course, Jim Cornette, Behind the Curtain, Real Pro Wrestling Stories. This is the book. It is a graphic novel telling a few stories from Jim's over 40 years of professional wrestling career. You do get a bookmark as well. Well, I got a bookmark because, and I got this hardback cover because this is one of the things, and I rarely do it, that I backed on Kickstarter. Other crowdfunding platforms are available. I rarely do any kind of backing for such projects. The Last of McGuinness, the Nigel McGuinness documentary, and a few other minor things here and there. But I backed this Jim Cornette and IDW Publishing, and they brought this out. Before I talk about the book and show you the artwork, I do want to read the quote that is on the back of the book. You see there the picture of Dennis Condrey, Jim Cornette, and beautiful Bobby Eaton. I should have just read it the other way around, but going the other way. But the Midnight Express, the tag team that Jim is, of course, most famously famous really for managing. I've been captivated by the unique and outrageous world of pro wrestling since I was a child. After a 40-year career and a lifetime of research, to be able to memorialise these fascinating men and moments in a graphic novel is a dream come true. That is the quote from Jim Cornette himself on the back of the book. There's also a quote from Jim Ross saying he's one of pro wrestling's most profound storytellers and historians is unquestionably the great Jim Cornette. So it might well show you some of the artwork, some of the stuff in the book. Backing it on Kickstarter, I did get digital copies, but I thought I might get copyrighted or some complaints if I put up actual pages of it, so I'll just have to show you the book. But the book, well, first of all, the book, in the presentation of it, as I show you, you see it's obviously the Z graphic novel style. You get that kind of artwork. It's actually really, the artwork is very well done. They took a little bit extra time in doing it. The presentation of this book is really, as you can see, really from this first, the first page of the stories, is actually very reminiscent of those kind of, well, Americans had it. Well, America had it more than the UK. I don't think the UK really had any such show. But it's almost reminiscent of one of those late night. I think they were mostly horror versions with the likes of Svengoolie, Elvira. There's many regional horror hosts that Jim Cornette has talked about on his podcast before, where it's a host and they introduced 3 or 4 mini stories over the course of the show. So maybe a 15-minute, 20-minute, half an hour maybe show. It could differ in size depending on maybe they edit it down to maybe 2 or 3 stories, but it's short stories maybe to fill time in their schedule. So it's very reminiscent of that. Jim, as he makes his kind of introduction, then leads us into the different stories. Some of the stories that are featured are like about Sputnik Monroe and the integration racially of pro wrestling fans. There is other stories such as about the original Sheik. I don't know whether you can really see them, but the original Sheik standing there with Abdullah the Butcher. There is also stories like about the Jerry the King Lawler Andy Kaufman match, which I'll return to in a moment. There's also Junkyard Dog and the Fabulous Freebirds. There is, if I can find it. Also, yeah, we'll just kind of skip because I don't want to spoil all the stories. There's also a bit about the Montreal screw job as well. These are all obviously Jim Cornette in association with IDW Publishing retelling the stories. The Montreal screw job was, of course, part of the first series of the Dark Side of the Ring show, which Jim contributed to, and that's coming back for series 2. And I believe Jim said on his podcast that he hopefully will be part of series 2. I think he pretty much guaranteed to be part, part of the second series. So there's some really good stories in this. One of the stories that I'm really glad that, obviously Jim Cornette over 40 years, so many stories that he knows, and I'll get back to that later as well. One of the most, honestly, just truly, not just because it's in the book, but one of my favourite stories about wrestlers on the road is about the fabulous Fargos, and really their story about what they make a hitchhiker think has happened. That is a really funny story. I've heard it obviously from Jim before on his podcast. It's a hugely funny story. Genuinely one of my favourite stories. I said I would go back to the Jerry the King Lawler, Andy Kaufman story, and I will do that because actually if you get this book, which I believe will be available over the next couple of months, just check IDW Publishing and Jim Cornette's social media. I think there's, like I said, there may be probably different versions available. Like I said, there may be I think they're going to be making available a digital version because we got the Kickstarter backers got a code to download I think two slightly different versions. Just the format's different, not the content, but just two slightly different formats to download, and I downloaded them and I backed them up onto a hard drive. So I believe there will be a digital version if people don't want books or don't want more shelf space taken up. But I would say it's a really thin book. It's about 42 odd pages, all double sided, of course. So you get about 80 pages. So I would have said it would return to the Andy Kaufman, Jerry Lawler stuff because if you look, see there, right there's press cuttings and there's photos as well. These press cuttings and photos that are on this from the actual match itself in Mid-South Coliseum on April 5th, 1982. All the photos, I believe, are from Jim Cornette's personal archive. Anybody who's a fan of Jim Cornette or knows about the guy, he is at his house, what he calls Castle Cornette, has a vast archive of wrestling memorabilia, posters, press cuttings, photographs. He started off as a ringside photographer, and as a fan that takes photos at local wrestling shows, I sincerely hope that he does continue to work on the book that he said a couple of weeks ago that he would be doing or would be starting, and that is a book of his photographs. I would love to see some of the photographs that Jim actually took during the matches, see what they're like, see what matches, even hopefully if he does do a photography book that includes some perhaps some photographs taken. I know that he did some kind of studio work at some of the, I believe it was him, or am I thinking of Bill Apter? But anyway, I'm sure it was Jim Cornette, yeah. Certainly did some photographing of the wrestlers backstage. Hopefully that included not just action shots, and also any photographs that were taken, or he took maybe behind the scenes, behind the curtain in the locker rooms or in the arenas, before the events or after the events. I would love to see what kind of ones that he has. I love to see his collection of photographs. Hopefully that book will eventually appear. I really do hope so, and I'm sure he's got some really good ones. So this book is a really good book. It's again, it's graphic novel style. So Their speech bubbles and the yellow boxes are the text telling the story. I've only really glanced at this book, really read it through a little bit, just have been so busy, and only got it in my hands a few days ago now. So it's a really good read. The stories are told. The couple of stories that I've read are told very succinctly and very simple. They're kept so that people understand obviously what is going on. One of the great things is that you get not only get a fantasy card, 3 fantasy cards with different announcers thought of to do it. So Lance Russell in Comiskey Park, Jim Ross in Shea Stadium and at the LA Coliseum, Gordon Soley, who are just fantastic announcers. You also get a what's called in here Cornette's Glossary of Pro Wrestling Terms. Just I'll read this quickly. These are kind of all what used to be insider terms, which a lot of people know nowadays. Couple that I'll just read out because there's about 8 pages of that. Broadway, a time limit draw, also referred to as going through. Where else? Green, inexperienced, a rookie. So if somebody describes a wrestler as being green, or you're green, or you're very green in this job, it is obviously inexperienced. What other one could I? Yeah, one of my favourites. We used to. I cannot remember. It's one of our favourite phrases from childhood. I sincerely cannot remember where we heard it from. But job guy or a jobber, a person whose sole occupation in wrestling is to lose to other people, whether talented or horrendous. If you seldom win and are mainly used to put guys over is another term. Obviously, I mean to let them win or to make them look good and then lose. You are a job guy. More broadly, any loser, failure, or screw-up could be called a jobber or jabroni. Okay, jabroni was one of the sayings kind of made popular in wrestling by The Rock, obviously. So there's a really good book. I'm not going to have this review going. I really like it. To be honest, yeah, it's good book. There's some good stories. I mean, a few of the stories are obviously. Again, if you listen to Jim Cornette and you hear the stories before about the Fabulous Fargos, I mean, every wrestling fan should know about Andy Kaufman and Jerry the King Lawler. If you don't, go watch Man on the Moon. I don't know whether he still does it, but Lawler had a podcast at least, and he talked about it then, and he's done many interviews about it, and there's footage on YouTube and other platforms available to discuss it. I'm sure there's many probably fan-made YouTube channels that will discuss that situation as well. So it's a really good book, really enjoyed it. I'm glad I backed this on Kickstarter. Again, other platforms are available, but different stories about Ric Flair, Jerry Lawler, Andy Kaufman, Buck Monroe, The Sheik, The Junkyard Dog, Fabulous Freebirds, The Midnight Express, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, including a story about the 1975 plane crash that Ric Flair, Johnny Valentine, and a couple others, including Tim Woods and his action. I've heard the story before again, but what Tim Woods did after that plane crash was unbelievable, and that's told in this book. Honestly, with Jim's knowledge of pro wrestling, of the stories that's taken place over the years, the sources that he has, the people that he knows or has known, honestly, I would not be surprised. I mean, I would love it to be, but I don't know whether it will be, but I would not be surprised if this was the first of several different editions, because I'm sure there's even more rowdier and more crazy stories that could be told in another edition of Real Pro Wrestling Stories. Jim Cornette presents Behind the Curtain. I'm sure Jim can scout out or knows other ones that possibly didn't make the cut for this one, but could easily make the cut for another couple of versions of this. But it's a really good book.